Transportation Commission to order. Oh, if you'd read the instructions, please.
Sure. Welcome to our virtual meeting. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. Members, if you are able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. All panelists, that is alders, commission members, and staff, have the ability to mute and unmute themselves. Please continue to use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the body, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Joe. Patrick, would you call the roll, please?
Okay. Nasro Halie.
Here.
Grant Foster.
Here.
Chris McCahill.
Here.
And Kovich.
Here.
Denise Jess.
Here.
Bill Bremer.
Here.
Ken Straight.
Here.
Bridget Brown.
Here.
Harold Cleams.
Here.
That's it.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Did everybody have an opportunity to look at the minutes from the last meeting? If so, is anyone willing to make a motion to approve them? Okay, I have Bill and Ken, so I assume that's a motion and a second.
Sure.
Okay. Anybody have any discussion with regard to the minutes? So please raise your hand. Seeing no hands, we'll assume unanimous consent vote in favor of approving the minutes. If anybody is opposed, please raise your hand. Okay. Any public comment? Joe, you mentioned we didn't have anybody signed up. Patrick, Joe, did you see anybody?
No, there's only somebody registered for item 7, but since we're not going to be dealing with that, then that's all there is.
Okay, all right. Any disclosures or recusals this evening? If so, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none. Right, with regard to the consent agenda, we have 3 items on the consent agenda this evening. It's item 2, 3, and 4. Items 2 and 3 are on for approval, and item 4 is on to refer that item to the March 10th, 2021 TC meeting. Anybody wish anything to be excluded from the consent agenda? I believe we don't have anybody registered, according to what you just said. Okay. Does anybody wish any of those items to be excluded from the consent agenda? Okay, seeing none. I would entertain a motion to approve items 2 and well, I'll read the Legistar numbers just to make sure. Item 2 is 63697. Item 3 is 63922, and the referral March 10th is Legistar item 64254. Do we have a motion to approve items 2 and 3 and to refer item 4 to the March 10th meeting? Ken?
So moved.
Okay, there's a motion by Ken. Sarah, second? Harold? Okay. All right, there's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody objects. If so, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, we'll record the unanimous consent vote. I wonder if there's any protocol on how long I have to wait to make sure nobody raises their hand. Okay, let's go forward with item number 5. These are operational and COVID-related updates from parking, traffic engineering, and Metro. Sabrina, why don't you go ahead and go first?
All right, sounds good. And is it okay if I share my screen to just bring up the attachment? So a
Sure, you
couple of
bet.
charts. All right. Is that looking okay for folks able to?
It is.
Okay, great. So I just want to kind of give an overview of year-end revenues, expenses, where we ended for the year as of year to date. Keeping in mind these are not final numbers, but should be relatively close. And I think as everyone is aware, last year was not a good year for the park utilities financials. The total revenues through December were 6.9 million. That's compared to 16.5 million in 2019. So a 9.7 million decrease in revenue, or a total of 58% decline. Taking a look at revenues by category, the first one listed is attended facilities. And this represents revenues from hourly and daily visitor parking. So these are non-permit parkers in parking garages. This typically reflects our largest source of revenue. In 2019, it was 9.7 million. In 2020, those were revenues total 2.8. So both our largest source of revenue was also the revenue source most impacted by the pandemic and changes in demand. So that reflects a 71% decrease. Off-street meters were close behind at a 69% decrease. And then on-street meters, which had a lower impact at 50%, partially because these also tend to be higher demand. The proximity and convenience of on-street parking means that these are usually the first spaces that folks look for, with the exception of long-term all-day parkers. So that's not surprising that we'd see less of an impact with the on-street metered revenue. And in terms of the reason and cause for these, it's overwhelmingly just a reduction in demand. Our occupancies and utilization are extremely low. And the first couple months of the pandemic, when we had suspended on-street metered fees, we had almost zero occupancy in the garages. We did get a little bit of use when we reinstated on-street meters, but still very low usage of those facilities. And revenues continue to be impacted, again, primarily from loss of demand. We did have some fee waivers for the curbside pickup and streeteries, as well as the emergency temporary reductions for fees in off-street facilities. So there could be some component or a minor impact on revenues from those fee reductions, but again, overwhelmingly, those impacts are related to demand and utilization, which continue currently. So we've not seen a significant increase really since June of last year. This provides just an overview of the revenue and occupancy differences by facility. I'm not going to go into too much detail. As you can see, they're all red. Reductions in all facilities and occupancies and revenues across the board. So year-to-date operating expenses were about 11.5 million. Those don't reflect all all expenses yet. So the final year-end numbers we expect to be higher once everything posts. But as of this time, they were comparable to the year-to-date expenses from last year, and actually about 1% lower. Just taking a look at our parking reserve fund balance and the impacts on COVID. I wanted to give a brief overview of what the parking reserves are and how the parking utility is funded for folks who may not be familiar. So historically, the parking utility has been a self-sustaining enterprise agency that funds all operating and capital expenses through fees generated from parking users and collected from those four services listed above. In a typical year, we would expect to generate between 4 to 5 million in net revenues, and those are added to our parking reserve fund balance for funding of large infrastructure replacement projects, garages, large technology, and other capital projects. So just taking a look at 2020, we started the year at about 21.6 million, had about 3.3 million in capital project expenses, and roughly a 5.5 million operating deficit. So those operating deficits and losses from revenue are currently being covered by reserve fund balances to continue to cover those expenses that revenues are not able to cover. We also did have a one-time revenue, which was the sale of the Judge Doyle podium as part of that development project and agreement with Stonehouse. So that did offset some of the reductions in reserve fund balances. That sale was about 5 million. So our projected year-end reserve balance is at 17.7. For 2021, we do anticipate continuing significant reductions in revenue, again, having not seen really any significant change and at losses still at 70 to 80% for revenues, projecting 6 million in parking reserves for this year's operating budget expenses. This does not take into account for 2021 or 2022 the timing of any capital expenditures. So these balances aren't reflective of capital costs, but just because the timing is unknown in terms of where they'll hit in 21 or 22. But overall, we have about 2 million in existing projects that are planned for construction within the next 2 years. So 2022, we're looking at, and this is assuming we're seeing some decent recovery in next year's operations, but that we likely aren't going to be back up to 100% demand with continued remote working even after the pandemic. I think we can expect demand to be lower for some time. So again, it's not a crystal ball. These are just projections based on what we think is likely to occur in terms of demand and revenues. So 2022, looking at a year-end reserve fund balance of 8.7. So as you can see, there are significant impacts in continuing to draw down those reserve funds. So moving forward, we will be looking at potential rate structure changes that may provide some revenue increases, but do want to note that the market is highly sensitive to price and demand. I think for folks who've been through maybe prior rate changes and followed the revenue impacts, we've often seen actually net decreases in revenue following a large increase. So there can be certainly negative impacts. It isn't a one-to-one ratio where we can just increase the fees to get to the targeted revenue that we need. So certainly we're keeping a close eye on this and expenditure restraint. A number of capital projects, we're looking at reducing scope and delaying where we can. So we'll continue to keep this body apprised of the finances in coming months. And an update here on Wilson Street Garage, and I won't go through all the activities, but I'm sure many of you heard about the sprinkler malfunction at the Wilson Street Garage. And I'll go ahead and stop sharing. Actually, I don't think there's anything else on this document. So we are still investigating the cause of that malfunction. There have been a number of inspections, working with the contractor on that. And, preliminary inspections have not been able to determine a cause. We did review all video from that day and time frame to see if there was a cause. So oversized vehicle that, bumps a sprinkler could cause inactivation, tampering, and other such issues. But with video review, there was no cause seen, no activity that would have caused that to occur. So still looking to determine what caused that, and obviously prevent future such incidents from occurring. Again, looking at timeline, it's I think uncertain still. The I think primary issue right now is temperature with the water flowing into those pipes. They are still frozen, and until we can get the fire suppression system back up and running and the pipes drained, we won't be able to safely open that garage to the public until we have a fully operating life safety system in place. So it could be up to several weeks depending on weather for that closure. We're hoping that it is not that long and we can get it back up and open to the public, but we'll be, when we have a better idea, and still waiting for some time estimates from the contractors to see what the most realistic time frame is to put out to the public and notify our permit holders there. But it's possible it could be still several weeks before we're able to reopen that. On a positive note, good news, our meter replacement project is moving along. We've replaced a number of the aging multi-space machines throughout the winter. So staff has been continuing to make progress on that. And once we get a little bit warmer weather in, we'll have the vendor come in to assist with the new multi-space machines that will be installed at the off-street lots, and finish up the single space meter installation. So we expect, hopefully mid-spring, weather conditions permitting, that we'll be able to get that project completed. And I've also learned that the programming and some of the integrations to be able to get the mobile payment app that vendor provides up and running is nearing completion. The recent testing and some of the issues with just getting the integration with the enforcement software worked out seem to be going well. So we're expecting to be able to, hopefully get that up and running and announced to the public and market that option for a pay by cell for the on-street parking meters. So that is good news. Another update, this was included in the report, the parking enforcement study and report has been completed. It should go into Legistar, I think, if not today, tomorrow or Friday. And that will be introduced at next week's council meeting. So I think with that, if there are any questions, happy to answer.
Questions for Sabrina? Harold, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for walking us through that. I have one question about the operating expenses. I noticed that 11 and 12% increase on salaries and benefits. Can you talk about where that's coming from?
So I believe those are primarily related to, in last year's budget, there was a transfer of parking enforcement expenses. So we had traditionally, or I should say historically, paid for the 5 walker positions. Those are the folks that do the on-street meter enforcement. And then several years ago, the RP3 enforcement officers were included in the park utilities budget as a way to track those expenses for that program, which we administer. So those were moved into park utilities budget and under that program. And then in last year's operating budget, the remainder of other activities performed by parking enforcement officers, those salaries and benefits were shifted from the MPD budget, which is funded through the general fund, into the parking utilities budget. So that's primarily where you're seeing those changes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Nazir, you next.
Thanks, Sabrina. Is it possible to obtain the copy of the PowerPoint?
Yes, and that's I think it's the PDF was what I was showing, which I believe was attached. I'm not sure to the Legistar file, but if not, happy to send that out to the group.
It's in Legistar, correct, Patrick? Yeah.
Thank you.
So it should be in Legistar already.
Okay. So my other question is, if you go back the beginning of the budget and now the end of it, is there what other strategy to go back and to increase some of those revenue lost?
Yeah, I think the challenge is with demand being as low as it is. It's difficult when you go from 70-80% average occupancy, a number of large special events on weekends and evenings that are generating quite a bit of use and revenue for our facilities, to really no activity in the downtown area, and most commuters and others working remotely. So there is, I would say, a significant limitation on what we can do to generate that level of revenue to mitigate the impacts from this. They've been pretty devastating and really kind of an overnight change. So, our focus has been to continue to reduce expenses where we can, and really try to keep things to absolute necessary expenditures for operations and maintenance of facilities, but delaying any unnecessary purchases or maintenance items that can be delayed without negatively impacting the longevity or life of the garage. Trying to push those out, and again, we're hopeful that as the vaccine rolls out, we will see activity pick back up, and eventually we'll start seeing that demand increase again. But there are limited options in terms of that level of revenue. When we're talking 9, almost 10 million, and over half of our revenues to recoup that through creative ways.
Thank you.
Bill, go ahead.
Thank you. Sabrina, do you anticipate that there may be some delay in some of our major projects such as Lake Street?
We've been in discussions regarding the likelihood that there will need to be other funding sources for that project, and other projects that the park utility may have going forward. So I think there's understanding from finance and others that the park utility is not in a position to fully fund a $23 million garage project, but there's also a desire to keep moving with that and to issue that RFP there may be some TIF depending on what proposals we receive that could help fund that project as well. So I'd say yes, there is a possibility, but it would be likely if we want to move forward that some combination of borrowing, TIF, and parking reserves would need to fund those types of large projects in the near future.
Okay, anybody have any other comments or questions for Sabrina? Okay, thanks, Sabrina. Yang, you're next.
Thank you, Anne. Good evening, everyone. I will provide a verbal update, and I will cover mainly 3 areas: COVID impacts, also some personnel staffing update. Also, finally, I'll provide some updates on some of our key programs, projects, and initiatives. So for COVID impacts, I'm happy to report that we have been very lucky recently, and the minimum impact on us is there, but it's pretty minimum. A few weeks ago, correlating with parking division, we also rolled out COVID symptom screening policy for both divisions, and ask our employees to measure their temperature and answer a few questions before the report to work every day. So hopefully minimize the chance of spreading the disease at the workplace. That's been going well. We were also able to place about 30 employees on the city's vaccination standby list for essential workers, mostly crossing guards, as some of them are actively on their job duty for some school districts, and others may be called to duty very soon. We also included some front desk service personnel who has to interact with the public, and also field staff who do a lot of inspection, meet with contractors in field for an extended amount of time. So hopefully many of those folks will get a vaccination sooner rather than later. This month also marks kind of the anniversary of the start of the pandemic. So thanks to the mayor's office and the Common Council, there was a honorary resolution presented at the Common Council last night, honoring all the different essential workers being involved. So traffic engineering was regularized for our role in the city's COVID response and recovery, such as through programs like shared streets, street eatery, active traffic management, all at the same time maintaining all the critical traffic infrastructures in a timely manner, and handling a record number of requests from the public. Also, new initiatives such as Vision Year. So we're grateful for that. So let's move on to staffing and personnel. So generally speaking, our staff are in high morale. So being very productive. We implemented a work share program started from end of January, and now the current end date is planned at the March 14th. So it may be extended, but at this time that's a timeline. So I've been correlating with the different sections about maintaining our service. At the meantime, allowing our employees time off to participate in the work share to avoid the layoff. So that's going on as well. We had a couple incidences that employees were not able to participate due to the fraud committed by others. Unfortunately, they were already told that somebody already filed complaints on their behalf, claims on their behalf. So hopefully we can clear that out sooner than later. We have a few vacancies, quite a few vacancies right now, and we got approval to fill the assistant city traffic engineer position, the crossing guard supervisor position, and also over 10 crossing guard positions. So the crossing guard positions are posted already. So we're looking forward to receiving many applications from good candidates. And other 2 positions will be posted very soon as well. We are also working on ordinance change to kind of finalize the transition of the crossing guard program from the police department to traffic engineering. There is some language in the ordinance needs to be cleaned up for that. So working on that, we are going to introduce the resolution at the council on March 2nd, and that'll be referred to Transportation Commission on March 10th, and to TPPB on the 15th. So just heads up, that's coming. So finally, some really quick updates for some other key programs, projects, and initiatives. We have a few kind of major programs every year, as you know that. So we went through the traffic signal priority list. So that's done, and we are working on the actually assessment district now for the new signal this year to be installed at the West Washington and Henry Street. Hopefully we can finalize the plans for the neighborhood traffic management program as well. We have a follow-up today later. There's also a staff team working on coming up with countermeasures and rank all the different requests for the pedestrian bicycle enhancement program. Last year, we also received a record number of requests for that program. We received over 150 requests for improvements. So the staff team from traffic engineering, MPD, city engineering, Metro Transit are working on together and evaluating all of them and rank them based on safety, operations, and equity considerations. So hopefully we can get a list out and we can start implementing those projects. There is, the traffic calming subcommittee, is also looking to particularly, change the process for the program, and so we'll see what happens there. But for this year, we'll at least bring that list to the commission for information. Hopefully, we will have more details on that soon. So those are the kind of the programs, other key projects. We started to work on the citywide LED conversion project right away. You may remember that that's a $3.1 million project spread over 3 years, involved systematically changing all the non-LED streetlights in the city that we controls to LED. It's about 6,000 of them going to change. That's a lot. And we our plan is to handle all the work in-house, without help from the contractors. Just because we found that from our project development process, it will cost us three times more to have some contractors to do it. So we're going to do it in-house, but that means that's going to be a big challenge for us. that's a lot of work, and our crew is kind of already busy. So we need to kind of reprioritize things, and also has to be very thoughtful in the planning and execution process to get it done. But so far, I think it's going really well, and I'll keep the commission updated on that. So the second project I want to mention is the Shared Streets program. I know some commission members are very interested in that. We had we started a program last year because of COVID. We did a survey at the year end. We received over 1,000 responses from the survey. So we went through them. And the survey is overwhelmingly supportive on the program with 84% support rate. So we're going to bring the program back. We're working on the details. Hopefully we can do a bigger and better project. Another thing that staff is also working on very diligently is how to be more equitable in the program. How can we put equity front and center as we identify the project list? And staff actually did a lot of research, looking at what other cities are doing, and some best practice for equity. So we hope to get a list together and run it through some major stakeholders like the police department, fire department, Metro Transit, and others, and then bring the list to the commission for final approval. I probably would not get by without mentioning the Vision Zero initiative. I think that's on everyone's mind. The initiative is moving forward very well. We had our second stakeholder task force meeting last week with better attendance from the committee leaders. So that's moving forward. We are moving forward with all the different subgroups. So making a lot of progress, and particularly we are refining our communications and engagement plan. One idea we are pursuing right now is to combine the engagement of Vision Zero with other transportation initiatives, such as the Complete and Green Streets study. The reason is that we go to the community for different things. So instead of come to them this week asking for Vision Zero, asking about Vision Zero, and next week ask about the another transportation topic, we feel like it makes sense for us to do a better and a combined engagement, and ask bigger and deeper questions. Also a lot of causing fatigue to the communities that want to target. So we are working with our consultant to design, and also equity by design on that. We're also moving forward with the high injury network. As we explained at the TPPB and at the TC, trying to clearly define methodology to define a vision, to define a high injury network that's replicable each year is quite a challenge. Actually, the more we dig into it, the more challenging it gets. How to define it, and also how to use the GS data to make it happen every year. So we reach out to UW, the Traffic Operations and Safety Lab. So we're working with them on coming up with a good methodology to do that. That obviously takes time. So we propose to the staff office is working on an interim version, for the use of this year. And we're going to update TPPB and the TC on that. The idea is that for this year's project selection, we'll use the interim hybrid network, where UW is helping us develop the permanent one for the future. Then finally, a new initiative is kind of related to Vision Zero, but a little bit separate, is what we call 20 is Plenty. So as we do Vision Zero and share streets, we ask our community, we receive a lot of requests to reduce speed on neighborhood streets. Especially after we rolled out a pretty big program last year on reducing speed limits on arterial streets. So right now, the default speed limit citywide is 25 miles per hour. So we are thinking whether we should reduce that from 25 to 20 at the request of many citizens. So that actually will involve a lot of work. It's not simply just change the city ordinance, but rather we want to get the public support on that. We also need to identify how many signs need to be changed, how many new signs will be needed. So it's going to be a big undertaking in terms of logistics, also legislative process and public engagement. But so that takes time. So we think that the reasonable timeline, the earliest timeline, for systematic change at the city level, probably going to be next year. But this year we're going to roll out a couple of pilot projects to see how the neighborhoods react to it and how the rest of the public think that's good for them or not. So we are developing that. Right now there are two school of thoughts, whether to do individual streets here and there, or do one or two larger neighborhoods. So the staff needs to look into both options. And we also get some input from the kind of the Vision Zero stakeholder task force. And we plan to bring the pilot program to Transportation Commission, most likely a little bit later for guidance. And for the policy change, we'll bring that to TPBB, for a citywide kind of policy change and ordinance change. So that's the update that I have, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Anybody have any questions for Yang? Grant, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, not a question, but one quick comment. Just fully supportive of the 20 is Plenty campaign, and really appreciate you all taking those steps, and just wanted to share my enthusiasm and support for that, and hope that we can move forward as quickly as possible, expanding that to as many places as possible. I think it's a really great idea. So thank you.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions for Yang? Okay, not seeing any. Justin, you're up.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Like Yang, I'll keep mine verbal. So first, Metro ridership is slowly starting to come back. I think in the depths of last spring, I think we were at about 10 to 15% of normal. By the end of last year, end of 2020, we were closer to 25% of normal. I think in January, we were closer to 30% of normal. So again, still dramatically low, which is to be expected, but we are starting to see some movement in the right direction, and certainly expect that to pick up. However, I do want to just temper expectations that, much like with parking, even when things return to normal, we do expect to see a long-term shift in travel behaviors, more people working from home, all of that will impact ridership going forward for quite some time. I am optimistic that we will eventually get back to normal as people, start to adapt to new behaviors. And frankly, as the city of Madison continues to grow, I do think we will eventually get back to normal, but I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't take 4 to 5 years to get there. So obviously that's all speculative, but that's our current kind of working assumption. With that, obviously fair revenue is a concern, but the federal funds that have come in, we've received about $40 million in federal funds. That's been a huge lifeline and able to keep us afloat, I think, for quite some time. And so there's another package being debated at the federal level that would potentially bring in another 30 million or so to us. And so again, that would be huge and allow us, we've done some financial projections and we feel confident that with that additional infusion, we'd be able to kind of weather the storm until our fare revenues do return to normal, 5 years or more out. So we presented a series of service changes at a public hearing 2 weeks ago to you. We're planning to come back in another 2 weeks with an actual proposal for you to potentially approve or not. It is a slight departure from what we proposed. So now we would still propose to remove the 1027 and restore the 38. However, instead of doubling the frequency of the 2, this proposal would instead reinstate the route 28 and reroute that route slightly, including through Eakin Park and Emerson East, to cover some of the ground that is being lost by the 10 and 27. And it would still stagger the schedule of the 28 with the 2 so that elsewhere on the route, the effective frequency would still be every 15 minutes. And so we feel that's a good compromise. We've talked to a few folks in the neighborhood and feel relatively confident that compromise will be supported there. And we're putting all the details around it to make it a formal proposal for all of you. But expect to see more detail on that in 2 weeks. Vaccines, we have, I think Yang mentioned a little bit, we've set up a system with public health to we're kind of acting as the basket at the end of the day for all the extra vaccine doses to drop into. Where basically at the end of the day, if they have extras, they give us a call and we round up as many people as they have doses for, and we send them over to Alliant. That's been going for about a week and a half now, and we've already gotten about 50 of our drivers through, 50 out of 300. So we're making pretty good progress on that, but hopefully in the next week or so, we will be eligible to just be on the list and actually schedule our vaccine doses. I think the projection on that is still March 1st, which is next week. So our team, our drivers are very excited to be getting to that point. On that note, operator training is a big challenge for us. I think I mentioned this a little bit in the public hearing. We were short-staffed before the pandemic. We've got a lot of folks with pre-existing conditions who are not comfortable working right now, and so they're off doing other things. We had a rash of retirements, again, because of COVID, primarily, or at least accelerated their timelines due to COVID. And so we're struggling to stay status quo with our training. Fortunately, the job market is, fortunately for us, the job market has softened slightly so that we're getting more people in the door and willing to come work for us. But training is still a problem. We historically would have 15 people in a training class. We don't have a room big enough to socially distance 15 people. And so we are having to limit our training class sizes, which is, again, impacting our ability to stay at a good staffing level. So we're working on projections to kind of through the end of the year on how we can fix that problem and get to fully staffed and take advantage now while the job market is fairly soft. And then a couple updates on some big projects. Won't talk much about BRT unless you've got questions. I think that's been pretty well publicized. But the FedEx site that we talked about 2 weeks ago, that did pass council last night. We have gotten most of our approvals at the FTA level, and so that's all moving forward. So very few barriers remain to that project being successful, and so I'm very optimistic that we'll be able to close on that project July 1st and start moving some of our operations there. We as a staff team actually went there today, about 30 of us, to tour the facility, which was funny. The first time I got to meet a lot of people in person, which is a very, very weird situation for me. But it was good. I think we walked through and everyone was pretty excited about it. So ultimately, I think it's going to be the right decision for Metro and a good thing for the city overall. And then the technology project, again, I don't know how much I've talked about this project, but we do have a major technology project in our budget for 2021 that would upgrade all of our, what we call our CAD AVL systems, so all of our dispatch and vehicle location systems, as well as fare collection, real-time information for passengers about where the buses are and how long they'll be there until they get there. So just an entire suite of technology. That is a surprisingly large project. It is really a big undertaking, even though I think sometimes flies under the radar a little bit with some of these technology implementations. They're behind the scenes, they are quite cumbersome and challenging to implement. We are working on an RFP for that that we hope to release probably sometime late spring, early summer. And hopefully we have a vendor selected by let's say fall or end of the year this year. That project, it won't be flipping a switch. It'll take quite a while to implement that. And we do expect it to take potentially 4 years to implement all components of it. But do expect to see some progress on that, hopefully, again, on the contracting side this year, and starting to roll out some of the features next year in the years following. So that those are some of the high points that I want to touch on, but I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Okay. You must have anticipated everybody. I don't see any here. All right. Thanks. Thanks so much. Let us move on then to item number 6, which is our quarterly traffic safety report. Lieutenant Tony Fiore is here to update us on that.
Great. Well, thanks for the opportunity to visit with everybody again. Hopefully this year we'll be more, we'll be able to maintain our quarterly updates a little bit better than we were able to last year, given all the challenges of figuring this new system out. So I'm going to kind of provide both a quarterly report as well as kind of a 2020. Some of the facts and numbers I'll show you are kind of year to date or 2020 numbers. So if there's any questions or anybody has anything come up, feel free to interrupt me. Otherwise, I'll just roll through a PowerPoint real quick here. Do I have the ability to share?
You should.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Is that coming up all right?
It is. Yes, it is. You're
all right.
Good.
Continuing on for 2021, much similar to our 2020 traffic goals for the department, continuing to focus on hazardous moving violations, focusing on the high entry network as it's being developed and supported within the city. We hope to rely on that data and the information coming from that to help guide a lot of our enforcement efforts. Supporting school safety zones and continuing to be responsive to citizen complaints. So those are our overarching goals and focus areas for 2021 for traffic enforcement. Just showing two quick maps. One is the one on the right is a very draft version of the high injury network that's being developed within the Vision Zero group and from traffic engineering. I sought Yang's permission before I even displayed a draft here, but I wanted to compare and contrast a little bit as we're trying to rely on the high injury network, but it's not a perfect system. So a lot of it will rely on continuing sources of data for our understanding of where kind of the hazardous moving violations are occurring within the city. You'll see that the map on the left is the corridors that we currently share with Dane County in our grant enforcements, particularly for speed, alcohol, and seatbelt enforcement. The main emissions that you'll notice are the Beltline, Stoughton Road, Highway 30, which are included in our corridors for grant enforcement. That we feel those are reflective of high speed and high injury corridors, but due to the nuance of who's in control of those particular roadways, they aren't included in the high injury network data. So it creates a bit of a challenge, but it's certainly something we're comfortable with working in, relying on kind of two data sets to guide our operations, continuing to move forward. But, I don't think there's going to be a clean way to resolve kind of not including that data in some of the key data sets that the city relies on for decision making regarding the high injury network and some projects, but we'll make it work. But I just wanted to compare those two that we're going to kind of work off of both data sets moving forward, and certainly appreciative of the amount of data that's coming out of the high injury network work. But we'll still have to rely on some systems through bots and other sources. Just a review of 2020 real quick. We did maintain at 15 fatalities for the year from 11 crashes, I believe. We did have a fatality of a person that was involved in a significant crash in 2015. But given the length of time that passed between the crash and the person passing away, DOT, it's outside of their parameters in terms of considering it a fatal crash. So the person had some underlying medical issues, and the coroner or a medical examiner wasn't able to say back certain that the crash is what caused the person to pass away, but it was a crash-related fatality. But that's not included in our numbers. So our 2020 numbers overall were unfortunately 15 fatalities, which is the highest level, ties the highest level that we've experienced in Madison since we began to track those numbers going back to, I think, 2007. So definitely we saw a spike in 2020. It was nearly double. I think we had 8 the previous year, so it was nearly double the amount that we had the previous year. I'm going to see if I can flip between this interactive, see if they'll allow me to do that. Can you see the new map I pulled up that I'm zooming in on?
Yes.
Okay. So this map is all of our 2020 crashes in the city, and the dots are the crash location, and the density is the citation densities. So kind of comparing, contrasting where we're writing our citations with compared to where the crashes are occurring. And some of them are 1-for-1 in that we write a lot of citations based off of crashes. And if we can find the primary causative factor of the crash, we will issue a citation on those. But certainly a lot of those are officer-initiated traffic enforcement, whether it be projects, individual officers taking enforcement action, or grant work. So just to kind of overlay that, there's certainly outliers in both regards in terms of crash areas that we don't enforce a lot or don't get an opportunity to enforce a lot. And there's also areas that we enforce, more than perhaps we see, crashes occurring. But by and large, in most areas of the city, we're trying to continue our work where the hazardous and crashes are occurring and where they're resulting in crashes, I guess. So this map, along with other maps I'll show, I'm working very hard to get a outward facing, to renew the traffic blotter within the MPD website that will kind of allow us to share this type of information as well as the complaint information that I'll get to in a little bit. Is my PowerPoint back on screen?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Continuing on with citations, the green bar is 2018, the orange is 2019, and the purple is last year, and shows through each quarter we had a significant decline in the number of citations we wrote in each quarter, and certainly throughout the year, I think we were slightly above 50% of overall citations for the year in terms of compared to previous years. We still enforce for our hazardous violations, overwhelmingly speeding and OWI are our largest two hazardous moving violations that we write. And then compounded with everything else, most of the top 10 are what we consider contributing factors to crashes. So we're continuing to focus on hazardous moving violations as our primary enforcement areas and focus, and certainly speeding and OWI are our largest citations written. With non-hazardous moving violations, again, we saw a very similar fall off, even more significant. Part of that is due to the emergency declaration from the governor actually suspends enforcement of vehicle registration violations. So that's certainly a contributor to the fall off, but overall it trends very similarly to what we saw with hazardous violations. So a significant decline in the number of non-hazardous moving violations that we're writing. So mainly those are driver's license and vehicle registration violations, some hit and runs, vehicle equipment, and then a smattering of other citations to the tune of about 38 spread over the course of the year. So looking again where our focus is, we continue to trend, I feel, in the right direction in terms of trending towards doing more enforcement for hazardous violations than we are for non-hazardous violations, to the tune of about 2/3 of all the citations we write are for hazardous and about 1/3 for non-hazardous moving violations. Complaints, I'll just pull up our complaint maps again. Again, this is something I hope to have on our website so folks can come and access this as they want to see if what's happening in their neighborhood or their district or where the complaints are falling. This took a surprisingly large amount of effort to kind of change systems that we had in place in terms of tracking these complaints. We weren't really able we weren't logging them in a way that would allow us to map them, surprisingly. And we've been able to implement basically a hand way of doing it. If we pull up a complaint, we click it on the map, and the latitude and longitude that it gives us is where the complaint falls on the map. So it's not a perfect system, but certainly better an ability for folks to see where complaints are happening in their areas that they live, they work, or if they're calling in complaints to see if their neighbors are seeing the same things they are, or if those complaints are actually ending up somewhere and they're not just in somebody's voicemail box. So we, again, I can't remember the exact number of complaints that we had over the course of the year. I think we're somewhere in the area of 800 complaints taken in by the PD over the course of the year. And then lastly, just show you real quickly another map that we want to roll out is traffic complaints by district, by quarter, or the most recent quarter, I should say. And that will allow data a little bit closer to real time. Here we go. Sorry, everything was running a little slow for me there. So this, again, this map, as soon as we get that blotter back up and running for the police website, for the traffic section, I want to push this out. So if you live in the central district and you want to see what complaints came in the most recent completed quarter, you'll be able to do so and be able to see those about as real time as kind of the systems allow for us to do right now. All the information gets captured on a spreadsheet, and then again, once a quarter, we go back and load that spreadsheet into the mapping software to allow us to represent it on these heat maps. And you can actually hover over each spot and see what the complaint is for that area. Other than that, we continue to work, be an active member of Vision Zero, and we're doing some great work in not only Vision Zero as a whole, but certainly within the safety focused enforcement group that two of our illustrious members are present for. I can tell you that's an exciting group to be part of. Right now, we're focused on responding to we're preparing a response to some of the questions that were asked in the resolution in terms of the role that traffic enforcement plays in traffic safety and what enforcement is important in regards to safety. Some of the when, where, and how we get at that traffic. What type of enforcement is important and impactful. And then we're going to look at disparities and how our enforcement, what the outcomes are of those enforcement efforts, and basing that off of some good data that we have for citations. For I think we've got data going back quite a stretch, but really looking at probably the last 2 or 3 years and what data we're seeing coming out of the police department and how we can manage kind of those two challenges of traffic enforcement being a strong component of traffic safety, and how we can actively work to mitigate some of the impacts that those enforcement efforts have. So we're doing great work with that team. I just heard from BOTS that our pedestrian and bicycle safety grants are coming online earlier this year than they have in previous years, meaning that as things warm up and folks start to get out on foot and on bike more, we should be able to begin our safety operations, enforcement operations earlier than we had in previous years. Usually we couldn't start those until around June, and I hope to be able to start those sometime around mid-April this year. So we're going to partner with Shorewood and UWPD in those efforts. So we're rolling along with several grants in operation. Our test team is at full strength and doing great work, and continue to move along. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions for Lieutenant Fiore? Ken, go ahead.
Lieutenant Fiore, do you have any specific graphs over the years as far as just looking at the fatalities? What are common features? Like how many of those collisions was speed the primary issue? Those kind of things that we could take a look at. Was it, I would imagine it's a combination of speed and failure to yield, but by speed, I mean probably 15 miles over the speed limit or more, or something like that. Do you do that data as well?
We do. It's part of looking at part of the investigative process, particularly in fatalities. Those get examined pretty closely, and the causative factors are really pretty much known. I would say both speed and alcohol are the primary contributing factors in most fatal crashes. By most, I don't mean overwhelmingly. It's probably not as big a number as some folks would think, but it's, I think, over 50% you would attribute either or both, or a combination of both of those as the primary causative factors. So we continue to see both speed and alcohol. And Chris has actually done a lot of good work on this for our safety focused enforcement group in terms of all, not necessarily the fender benders, really what on the significant or fatal crashes, what is causing those to happen. And part of the challenge is that we're coming up against the limitations of our human system and data, and that a failure to yield causative factor is often the result of something else going on that we might not be able to ever prove. So if somebody was distracted through a cell phone or something else and they strike a bicyclist, we will probably not get an affirmative response that, yes, I was distracted by my cell phone, other than I didn't see them, but ultimately the crash occurred because somebody failed to yield to somebody. So I can tell you that speed and alcohol are significant contributors. The failure to yield realm of where you see a lot of the attributions for the serious and fatal crashes is a little bit trickier, just because it's imperfect data coming out of an imperfect investigative process.
Did you have anything else, Ken? Nope. Okay, anybody have any other questions for Lieutenant Fiore? Grant, go ahead.
Again, not a comment or not a question, just a quick comment. Just wanted to say thank you and appreciation. The information you've been sharing is really a big improvement over what we have been seeing in the past. And I really appreciate your focus on trying to dial into the data. And yeah, as you said, I think there's a lot of good work coming out of that subgroup, and it'll be great to share that out with everybody. But wanted to say thanks for your efforts on this.
Thank you, and thanks to you and Chris as well. Again, it's an exciting group. I think that group is going to produce a lot of good information as well as challenging information for discussion. And I think it's going to be a great group to continue to work with, and will provide great results for not only this group, but my bosses and other decision makers within the city. So I'm looking forward to it, and look forward to the next opportunity to meet with everyone.
Yeah, we very much appreciate the information. And Chris, we appreciate your willingness to serve on that group as well. So we know it's an additional commitment, but it's very useful and very helpful. So great information, and we look forward to not only using it here, but in our traffic calming subcommittee as well. So anybody have any last questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to item number 7. We bounced back and forth with this one on West Washington. We were hoping to have additional updates this evening, but there's been a lot of back and forth conversations, and constituents and other people were told that this would not be coming back to TC until March 10th. And since the plans weren't ready, I would ask for a motion to refer this item to the March 10th TC meeting. And we will take it up at that time. Is someone willing to make a motion to refer? Ken? Okay, we have a motion by Ken. Is there a second? Harold? Okay. We have a second and a third. Okay, and any discussion? Okay, we'll assume a unanimous consent vote to refer item number 7 forward to the March 10th meeting. If there's any objection, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, we'll record that unanimous consent vote. Next, we have item number 8, the Madison Yards, Sheboygan Avenue bike lanes review. So Yang, and then I think Sean, Mark, I'm not sure who all's here. Looks like Yang and Sean.
Yeah, Sean will be talking about this item. Go ahead,
Okay.
Sean.
All right, I'm gonna share my screen real quick. Hopefully you all can see it.
Yes.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. So the item before you is for informational purposes only. I'm just asking for feedback and input on a proposal for bike lanes on Sheboygan Avenue between Seago and Eau Claire Avenue. And this is located in the Hill Farms area, just south of University Avenue. And there's potential for these bike lanes to be extended in the future from Eau Claire to Whitney. And I guess some background as to why this is coming up now is with the approval with the Madison Yards project, there was a condition that they move the curb, if needed, on Sheboygan Avenue to allow for bike facilities. So with that, I have a few options, and I guess I'll go over the big exhibit first, I guess. So in red is the frontage of Madison Yards that would be looking to complete at this time. And there aren't any trees in this area, but just west of where the DOT ramp is, there are several trees which would be impacted if the curb were to be moved in that section. So it is possible to have the curb moved here without affecting many trees. That's in front of the Madison Yards frontage. But moving the curb to the west of here would likely impact many of the trees there. So with that, I came up with a few options. Currently, the configuration is a 21-foot drive aisle for much of the block with another drive aisle the other direction and a parking lane. So the width is 42 feet currently. So with keeping the existing width, I have two options. One would allow for buffered bike lanes in each direction, buffering from the parking lane and the travel lane. This option, it's a little tighter. The buffers are 1.5 feet wide, and the parking lane would be 7.5 feet. The other option is to not do buffered bike lanes and just have 7-foot bike lanes in a standard parking lane. And then our option to widen the street 2 more feet to the north on Sheboygan. I have 2 more options. One of the options allows for buffered bike lanes from the travel lane and the parking lane, and allows for 7-foot bike lane and 11-foot travel lanes. So I guess one of the considerations for this one that makes it different than the others is that I have 11-foot travel lanes, which could be a benefit to the buses using the Sheboygan Avenue. It's anticipated that BRT and other buses will use this route heavily. So I had an option with 11-foot lanes. And then the other option, the last option, option 4, has 2-foot buffers
on both sides of the bike lanes, 10-foot travel lanes, and 8 feet of parking. And I guess the last exhibit I have is just a picture of the trees that would be impacted on the west end of this block if we were to move the curb. And I had reached out to forestry, and I was able to talk to them, and they confirmed that if the curb were to be moved 2 feet, those trees would likely not survive. And there are quite a few of them. They're pretty mature. So I guess that's not ideal from their perspective. There is an option. It is possible for us to widen the street, in the Madison Yards frontage where more traffic is anticipated with the large development, and then have it taper down to 42. I guess that's kind of my fifth option, is that we do a little bit of both. So I guess with these options, I'd like to hear any feedback and input, and then I plan to come back at another date to get approval on one of these options.
Okay, what do people think? Harold, go ahead.
Yeah, 2 questions. So as you mentioned, this is going to be on the future BRT route. Can you say where on this stretch most likely the station would be located? I also would like to get input from Justin maybe on this question of 10 feet versus 11-foot travel lanes and bus operations. And then obviously I'm going to ask about what about the on-street parking in here?
Okay, I see Mike and Justin both with their hands up. So you guys want to go ahead and answer the questions? Just go ahead.
Sure, I can take it. So the station, there would be a station at Seago on Sheboygan, and then another station at Eau Claire, again on Sheboygan. I think certainly a 10-foot lane is not ideal, and does present some challenges, especially with the volume of buses that are going through here. This is going to be a section where 2 of the service patterns overlap with each other. The ones all going out to Middleton and the ones going out Mineral Point. So, we do expect to see a high volume of buses going through here. And the other thing just to keep in mind is that we likely would need to do kind of an island station where the bike lane passes behind these, because we really can't have the buses pulling into the bike lane to a station. So to my knowledge, I don't know that we've got any of those here, and there are maintenance considerations there. Snowplows can't fit through that little slot, of a narrow bike lane, things like that. So we need some maintenance considerations of it.
Mike, go ahead, Mike, if you have other comments.
Just to add to that, the 10-foot lanes, they kind of don't really work. Metro makes them work in situations where we have a relatively low volume of buses. And so I would not recommend that here. Now, one thing to consider is that from our perspective, the a 10-foot lane and a 1-foot buffer is better than a 10-foot lane and no buffer. If there's nobody there, that's essentially space. The other thing to consider here is that there are curves on the street. So, if you think about a bus going through curves, or even any vehicle going through curves, they tend to kind of cut the curve a little bit. And so if you think about an 8.5-foot wide bus with mirrors, it's perhaps 9.5 feet wide. That's a buffer of 6 inches or 3 inches on each side, and trying to keep that box within the envelope of a lane going through a turn is nearly impossible. And so for that reason, I would suggest either 10-foot lanes with buffers or 11-foot lanes. I think either would be okay.
Okay, Grant, go ahead.
Sorry, the question about on-street parking.
Okay, go. If you still had more, go ahead, Harold.
Yeah, just a question about the on-street parking, whether we need to keep that.
Sure. So I guess I'll start by saying on the north side, there currently is parking that is allowed at night. There's no parking from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. So there's night parking, which from my experience is not heavily used, and it's mostly for the apartments to the south, the residential. However, the south side is pretty heavily parked, and in some areas that's an RP3 area. So removing the parking would definitely, and with this area there is we do have some parking issues. That would have to be something that the alder would have to get involved in. I haven't presented any options to her without the parking removed, but that certainly could be something we could consider, but that would need more public input.
Thank you.
Okay, Grant, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I was going to ask about parking as well, and I think it might be worth just getting a little bit more data. And it seems like the utilization might be somewhat higher, but I think as we start to look at some of these, I think the same thing will apply with West Wash, for example. It would be helpful to get. I think we did this with the Monroe Street project, but doing an actual sort of parking study or evaluation around actual kind of total parking capacity within the area, within a quarter mile, or what we would normally do for people walking to the bus, for example. So how much parking is there, like off-street parking available in these areas? Because I think that needs to be factored in. Can you share what, in terms of motor vehicle traffic, both current and what's projected, say at full build out of the Madison Yards project?
I do not have that offhand, but if you give me a second, I can come back to me. I can give you that.
Okay, are there other questions while he's looking for that? Or we'll just hang and wait. Did you have any other questions, Grant?
Yeah, in terms of metro traffic, obviously BRT, so that puts it in a high category, I would expect, but just in terms of metro traffic, what do we know?
So currently it's very high. We've got a lot of buses going through there, and Mike probably would know better about an actual number.
Historically, we've had about a bus every 5 minutes going through there. I think that was at rush hour, and maybe every 10 minutes outside rush hour. So it's always a very high traffic street for us and very high ridership.
And when you talk about I think relatively strong preference for 11-foot lanes over 10-foot, can you just kind of describe what that looks like? Like, what's the actual kind of operating space of the bus, and what happens when you're in a 10-foot lane, and particularly in that scenario where two buses are, let's say two BRT buses are passing each other? What is that? What's the actual space that's sort of needed for those?
Yeah, so I think that's probably the most important element here, is that it's just a 2-lane street, and we've got BRT buses going in each direction. So a bus from outside of mirror to outside of mirror is almost 10.5 feet. And so often that means that the bus in a 10-foot lane is kind of either hanging over into oncoming traffic or is hanging over into the buffer or bike lane. And when two buses going in opposite directions meet each other, then they're both going to skew out. And in that situation, it's hard to imagine that at least the mirror, even with a buffer in the situation, at least the mirror is going to be in the bike lane. And obviously we want to make sure to avoid any mirror strikes or anything. So that would be my biggest concern.
Well, I guess Sean, did you have data or?
Yeah. I was just going to say, so our 2019 count of Sheboygan Avenue had 4,600 vehicles. With the Madison Yards build out, the full build out, I would expect that number to jump up quite a bit to maybe around 7,000 vehicles per day.
Okay, yeah, so definitely in the needing buffered bike lanes territory. So I guess my initial thoughts is I know it's not a popular thing, and it's to talk about eliminating on-street parking, but if we need, it sounds like we need 22 feet for the buses, and if we cheat that and call it only 20, it's going to be taking the space from the buffered area anyway, so it's not really a buffer. So it's 22 feet. I mean, by law, a motor vehicle, including a bus, needs to give at least 3 foot room, and that's minimum to someone riding a bike. So that's 28 feet. That only leaves 14 feet left, and 4 of those feet is for a gutter pan. So we're basically left with 10 feet, which are 2 5-foot bike lanes. So I don't know how, I mean, all those drawings are basically going to so option 1, I mean, it's shown with buffers, but they're not really there. I mean, that's, you basically, and if somebody opens a car door and there's a bus passing, you either crash into the car door or I don't know what. So I think my ask would be to look at an alternative that removes that parking. And I don't know what the agreement said in terms of moving the curb for the eastern section. I don't know if there's a limit on how far that can be, but if that could be moved far enough to accommodate on-street parking on the eastern half of the block, but allowing the sort of a 11 foot and 5+3 buffered bike lanes for the entire stretch. Maybe that would be not ideal for those looking for on-street parking, but still be able to maintain kind of half of it in that eastern section. I don't know if that's an option, but I think we definitely need to be looking at an alternative that removes the on-street parking and expands everything out to the space that it needs. Thanks.
I guess I'll just talk about how far we can move the curb. So with the terrace right there on the north side, that's 13 feet. So the most, I would be comfortable moving the curb would be 5 additional feet. So we like to have the 8-foot minimum terrace. So I guess, and that can be done with the agreement with Madison Yards. So I would say that if we can, the max would be 5 feet that we can move that curb.
Yeah, not enough for a car.
Thank you. Chris, go ahead.
I think I'm kind of echoing a little bit of what Alder Foster just said, but I think I'm convinced that probably the extra space is needed for the buses. So that does create an issue, not in favor of losing trees. So I guess I think the solution probably lies in looking at the entire street length and, what works basically section by section to strike the right balance between the parking needs, where they are, and what you've got to work with outside of that. So I think nothing really that hasn't been said, but that's what it's looking like to me.
Ken, go ahead. You're muted, Ken.
Did you talk with Alder Martin at all about the parking issue there? I mean, I go down this street probably 5 to 10 times a week, and the parking, I mean, even as you go around the corner, like on Eau Claire, there's plenty of cars parked. So I'm not quite sure where the people would go. And I'm pretty sure that these are apartments where the only other parking is purchase parking for renters. So visitors basically use this on-street parking. So anyway, did you talk with her at all about that?
We haven't discussed removing the parking on the south side with her, because we weren't proposing it at the time. But if that's the direction that we're headed, we're certainly going to have to talk with her about that, and I'm assuming the neighborhood about that. But we have not talked about removing that south side parking with her at this time.
Because realistically, if to move the curb for the Madison Yards, and then by the time you get to the DOT ramp and the Red Cross, if you're back to just the narrow stuff, I mean, I would guess you're right. You know, a lot of the access into Madison Yards will be University Avenue coming off at Seago and then making a right turn into Madison Yards. So the volume might be a little bit higher on the east side of your drawings than over by Eau Claire. But anyway, I think you're just going to need to figure out what is going to happen with that street parking.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Is that all you had? Okay. Nasser, you're next, and then Harold. And excuse me, Yang, did you have an answer to Ken's question?
Thank you, Ann. Yeah, I just want to add that yeah, it does look like, you know, parking might be the key here. And so as Sean mentioned, some of the parking here are under the RP3 program, which are kind of, you know, the permit program that residents can buy a permit to park over, you know, the 2-hour limit. The city ordinance requires a public hearing in front of the Transportation Commission when you know, those parking being removed. So we can definitely talk to Alder Martin and you know, look into different options and maybe have a hearing at a commission later on that.
Thank you, Yang, for that, for reminding us about the need for that public hearing. Nasser, you're next.
Yeah, I had similar question with Ken. So removing partially those trees, have you or Alder Martin, have you engaged with the, or are you planning to engage with the community in terms of what does that look like?
We have not, I guess, engaged with that because we were not proposing that. I think you know, that'd be very unpopular to remove all those trees. I believe there's about 20 of them, and according to Forester, that's you know, they're honey locust trees, so they're valuable to them. So remove those trees would be another thing we could discuss with the alder in the neighborhood if that's the direction we want to go. But I was not, I guess, proposing that today, but that's something we can look into if that's what we want to do.
Is that all you had, Nasra?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, Harold, you're next.
Yeah, thanks. Just a quick question. I'm not that familiar with the plan for the Madison Yards development, but I'm assuming there's not going to be some sort of parallel route created as part of the development that one might argue that, you know, maybe you can have a low stress bike route through the development, but I don't think, I guess there's still the Red Cross property that wouldn't get you through there. Is that right?
That's correct in the interim. We do have intentions of extending Madison Yards Way from Seago to through the Red Cross site whenever that redevelops. We do have that possibility once that redevelops, and so that could be be an option in the future, but we don't know what Red Cross's timeline is. So we would kind of be at the mercy, I guess, of them redeveloping before we could establish something like that.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Grant, go ahead.
Thanks, and thanks for taking a look at this. And I agree, it's going to require some conversations with the neighborhood, et cetera. Since obviously the parking seems like the kind of primary question, I do think that it would be really helpful for everybody to get a good understanding of what parking capacity does exist. So, both, again, including the private parking for the residences there, and then across the street. And I don't know much of anything really about the ramp that's there or what future development is calling for, but just an understanding of sort of total capacity and how that's accessed, and is that ramp available for is that completely private, or, cut off, or does that have an opportunity for, if residents have guests, are they able to pay to park there, or to just I think that a good broad understanding of the available car parking capacity, like I said, but within a sort of quarter mile of the corridor, I think would be really informative for everybody as we take a look at this.
Okay, there's a lot of great feedback. Yang, go ahead.
Thank you, Ann. Yeah, I want to see that's good point that Alder Foster brought up. Whether there's an opportunity for the residents on the south side utilize the parking provided on the north side by the Medicine Yard development, because as many of those use may have a primary daytime use for those businesses. So, but they do have a lot of apartments proposed as well. So, but we can definitely check into that. That's a good point. Also regarding, I want to just add to Harry's question about the bike accommodations within the development. Sean talked about the Medicine Yards Way, which is a parallel street to Sheboygan Avenue within the development. Hopefully, we can extend that down the at least down to all the way to Eau Claire as other property develop. I also want to mention that during the plan review process, we pushed the developer really hard, providing really good accommodations for pedestrians and bicycles. It's a couple of years back. I forgot about the details, but we asked for I think either 10 or 12 foot wide sidewalk on the streets, and we also required a lot of traffic calming features like tabletops to make the traffic really slow. So hopefully that helps.
Okay, thank you, Yang. Anybody have any other? Denise, go ahead.
Sure. I'm not exactly sure how to ask this, and it's probably a good question for the alder for that area, but I'm thinking about all that housing that's across on the south side of Sheboygan. And if I remember correctly, it's a lot of folks that aren't there a lot of elderly communities in there too? So I'm thinking about, economic, what the impact would be of losing that parking, and then what the economic impact would be for folks that might be more fixed income, to not have that access to parking. And then also just thinking about the PED issues. There's going to be a lot going on in that area. And, what are the PED crossings going to look like too, just to weigh that in, that we've got vulnerable users potentially in that area.
All excellent questions and feedback this evening. Did you have anything else, Denise?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. So Sean and Yang, we've got a lot of feedback here this evening. Sounds like 11-foot lanes would be the best for buses. It sounds like parking might be the key. We have a need for buffered bike lanes, ped crossings, a lot of questions about parking, potentially a public hearing, questions about potentially removing the curb or moving the curb. Have you gotten all of the feedback that you need, Sean and Yang? Or do you need any clarifications on what's been covered this evening?
I think those are really good feedback. And that's what we're looking for while we bring this to the commission. We always get the really good direction, and I think we have a direction to move this further forward, and we'll keep working on it. So just maybe Sean has better answer on this. My understanding that the developer has a tight timeline. So hopefully we can work this out.
Yeah, if we need to have if a public hearing becomes an issue, we need to obviously get that figured out. We have a meeting on March 10th, and then the March 24th meeting is set aside for the joint meeting. We could have a short TC meeting beforehand. So all factors we need to take into account. Ken, did you have have a comment?
Sean, the next time you come, could you provide us with a little bit more information as far as where the bike lane on Sheboygan connects both on the east end and on the west end? I mean, so I know the traffic pattern of bike people now coming on Old Middleton generally then follow along that route and then go up on eastbound on University. Is there another source on the west end, and that would be, for example, coming down Whitney Way, and what are they currently using as far as their route to go east? Thanks.
Okay,
That's a great point. Yeah. Maybe I'll give you information right now, but Sean will definitely bring more information to the commission next time. We have a bike lanes plan on Seagull Road as well. So that's from along this the frontage of the development. Connects to University Avenue. That a back path, behind the by the golf course in Shorewood, and to the south end, we want to connect that to the existing buffer bike lanes on Seagull, by the school area. We also look into adding buffer bike lanes on Whitney Way right now. Actually, we are kind of talking with the others, on that too. So eventually, we want to form a really good connection, on Sheboygan Avenue for bikes through here to the east and to the west.
Okay, a lot of great feedback this evening. And keep us posted on the timeline and the conversations with Alder Martin, because if we do need to get a public hearing scheduled, we should probably figure that out sooner rather than later. Any last thoughts before we move on? Sean, did you have any other questions of anybody?
Oh, I guess I just wanted to confirm. I think I heard it, but so the preference would be to remove parking rather than remove the trees. I am assuming that's the direction we're going. Okay, that makes sense.
Yes.
To me.
Okay. I see thumbs up from people. Ken, did you have a particular comment? Go ahead, Ken. You're muted.
I think what you need to do is to talk to Alder Martin and say, from her district's perspective, if it's trees versus parking, what is the preference? I think we're struggling with how to get that 11-foot lane. And I think we think it's either the parking or the trees, but I think that's where an alder who talks to her community is helpful to say which direction to go with that.
That's a good point. Thanks, Ken.
Ken, your hand is up again. Did you have more comments? No? Okay. Great conversation. Any additional comments? Sean, Yang, anything last comments from you before we head to the next?
Yeah, this might be for a future, but maybe related. Kind of as mentioned, that we do have plans to extend the bike lanes, from here all the way to Wiki Way. This, for this project, we'll probably stop at the Eau Claire. But eventually, there's, other and at the west, on the west from here, we want to take care of, and those actually what's happening here is going to impact what's going to happen over there in the future, right? We probably want to do things to be consistent. And I think the tree issue and parking issue will come up as well, just as for this block. So just want to give the commission a heads up on that, and we can also discuss with Alder whether if we do have to have a public hearing, whether we want to just take care of this block for now, we want to take care of the whole Sheboygan Avenue, from the east end to all the way to the west end. So we'll keep the commission updated after we talk to Alder Martin and the neighborhood.
Grant, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, Yang, and just sort of channeling our discussions at the traffic calming subcommittee and also our previous conversations at looking at the RP3 program and sort of the happenstance nature by which that has kind of come into being. I would be a strong advocate of taking the larger section and really dealing with it, because we're, as you said, we're going to need to anyway. I think it's better for everybody to know that that's what we're talking about, and to kind of take the full thing on and make a choice for the whole corridor rather than just kind of doing one block at a time. So I would definitely be in support of that, going that direction with it. Thanks.
Yeah, it makes sense. We've seen what happens if we don't go that route, and it can cause issues. So great suggestion, Yang. Other comments? Okay, we'll see this back again. Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Yang. Next, we have item number 9, follow up on the neighborhood traffic management program. Tom.
Yeah, hi. Tom Moore, traffic engineering. Thanks for having me back. I was here at the last meeting to discuss the traffic calming neighborhood traffic management program projects. We got through most of them. There were 3 projects that we wanted more information on or to look into further. I brought 2 of them. The other Lakeside Street, we weren't able to set up a neighborhood meeting in time for this meeting, so we'll have to come to a future meeting. But we can take the 2 that I brought, maybe look at them one at a time. The first one is the intersection of Post Road and Todd Drive. And this is the traffic flow map, which shows volumes. So they're relatively high volumes on both Todd Drive and Post Road. And the complaint came to us through the Leopold Arbor Hills neighborhood resource team. And the complaint is that there's poor driver behavior at this intersection. It's currently an always stop, but drivers sometimes roll through the stop signs, just disobey them completely, cut the corners, So the idea here with this proposal is to install these islands to kind of force a tighter turn. From that flow map, you saw the majority of the traffic is using the Todd Drive to Post Road turn. This is also a bike route, Post Road to Todd Drive. So this turning movement is a bike route. And we have metro bus routes on both Todd Drive and Post Road. So speed humps are out of the question. It's already an always stop. Traffic circle at the intersection is kind of out of the question. Buses can't make turns around a circle at this intersection with these geometrics. So I think this is a pretty good solution to the problem that we've heard about. So I don't know if anyone has any questions. We could just discuss this one first, or.
Sure. Why don't we do them one at a time? Do people have questions on, whoops, just a second. I have to get there we go. Grant, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, you mentioned it's a bike route. There aren't any marked bike lanes, or are there at this point on Post?
On Post, no, I don't think so. No. This is set up so that, the 17 feet would be set up to allow enough space for bike lanes. But
And is that's face to face?
Yep.
And those are, does the island have a 2-foot gutter pan as well, or is it smaller, or what?
Yeah, 1 foot on the island, 2 feet on the street.
Okay. So it'd leave 14 for travel and a bike lane in the future.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I would say, I think the concept is good. What's the width of that island?
They're both 10 feet face to face.
So I guess I would consider narrowing it a little bit to be able to get a 5-foot bike lane in there with a travel lane, outside the curb gutter. So,
Okay.
But otherwise, I think that looks like a good recommendation. Thanks.
Sure.
Tom, any thoughts about narrowing them?
Yeah, that's something that we can do. As you can see right now, the bus turning movement, it kind of just barely squeezes in there. So that would provide a little extra wiggle room for them too.
Okay, other comments? Do we want to do motions on each project, or do we want to do them all together? Grant, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I actually had just one other question. It's hard to tell from this, but is there not a marked crosswalk on the kind of southwest crossing of Post? Is it just on the one side?
That's right. Yeah, it's just on the one side right now, I think.
So that would be maybe, I guess 2 things. One, maybe consider, repainting or strengthening the crosswalks to help reinforce the overall intersection, and also just make sure in terms of placement that like it looks like obviously you're taking that into consideration for the easterly one, but just make sure that they're, I think we should put a painted crosswalk in there, and then obviously make sure the island's appropriately placed.
Yeah, we can do that with this project. We can put in those markings.
Great. Well, I would move approval of this, Anna.
Okay, so we have a motion to install the islands, narrowing the islands and adding the painted crosswalks. Did I catch everything, Grant? Ken?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the Post Road and Todd Drive. Any further discussion? Okay, we'll assume a unanimous consent vote. On moving forward with narrower islands and painted crosswalks on at the Post Road and Todd Drive intersection. Anybody objects, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing no hands. Great. Tom, unless you had any questions on that, let's move on to Wheeler.
Okay, Wheeler Road. So if you remember last time, we looked at two sections of Wheeler Road to the west. We were proposing speed humps on the section between Kennedy Road and School Road, and the section between School Road and Delaware Boulevard. So in the future, it sounds like there's a good possibility of Metro bus routes using Delaware and then Wheeler Road to the east. So that is why we weren't able to propose speed humps east of Delaware Boulevard, even though this section, Comanche to Sherman of Wheeler, ranked #1 in speeding of vehicles over 35 miles per hour and speeding of number of speeding vehicles over 40 miles per hour. So this had some of the worst speeding that we saw with our data. And we hadn't proposed anything. We got feedback from the alder and some residents that we should look into this. You as a commission asked us to look into it, so that's what we've done here. So I'll just go through. This is kind of like the overview with the proposed speed humps. So here is what we were proposing. This is a series of islands. So just some things to point out on this section of Wheeler Road. We added bike lanes, which you can see here. They're not in the aerial, but this is what is out there now. Bike lanes with on-street parking for the entire length with some bus stop locations. Those are shown with the dashed markings. This area to the north of Wheeler is Cherokee Garden condominiums. And they describe themselves as an older demographic. And to the south here is an assisted living center. And then this right here is a community garden. And then we have the middle and elementary school here. And Comanche Way is the only in and out to the Cherokee Park neighborhood to the north. So this is high volume, high speed on Wheeler Road, a lot of traffic going then up to Comanche Way. So I guess another thing to look at is the sidewalks. There's really no sidewalk on the south side for a big portion of this. There aren't really any pedestrian crossings. There aren't any intersections between Comanche and Sherman. So it's just driveways. So looking at our options, speed humps were out of the question. Traffic circles, we can't really put them at driveways. There aren't any four-legged intersections to put those in. So we're kind of left with the islands. Another thing is the pedestrian crossings. That wasn't really a complaint brought to us of any specific pedestrian crossings that could use additional treatment. So that's kind of the background of how we get to a series of islands. Part of the complaint is that even though we mark the bike lanes and allow for on-street parking, the on-street parking is not heavily used. I went out there this past week overnight, and there were only 2 vehicles parked on the street overnight for the entire length. The one area of concern could be the community gardens, that their only parking availability is the on-street parking. So this area here could be used for, or more heavily used in the summertime. So that's something I think I'm gonna look into a little bit further, try to get some more feedback on that. But that's really the only question we have for this stretch. But part of the complaint was that speeds are so high, drivers are kind of, even though it's marked with narrower lanes, they don't really stick to that narrow lane. They're kind of all over the place. So the islands would kind of force drivers to force them into their lane and slow down kind of to get around the islands. I think that pretty much sums up the island. So we would have to remove parking. So here's a typical island with typical dimensions would be 190 feet of parking removal. We could shorten up the island, possibly around that community garden to minimize the parking loss adjacent to that. But that's about it for these islands. Now, to the Comanche Way Wheeler Road intersection, we looked at a traffic circle for this intersection to get the most horizontal deflection through Wheeler Road traffic. The issue with the traffic circle is that it would be extremely tight for Metro buses to make the left turn, and they would have a route that goes up to the Cherokee Park neighborhood and back. And how we typically handle larger vehicles with traffic circles is that we allow left turns in front of the circle. And we've had feedback from different situations like that where some people don't like to see other people turn left in front of the circle. They consider it a roundabout, and so that causes some confusion. So I think a traffic circle here could possibly cause more problems than it would fix. So that's how we get to these islands. And with these islands, I don't have the dimensions on here from face to face. I should have put those on, but it's kind of the same as the Todd Post intersection. So these are shown as 17 feet from face to face. We could, with a 10-foot in between. So the islands are basically exactly the same. But so we can narrow up these islands too, just like on Post Road. For this dimension on Comanche Way, this side is 19 feet to allow for that turning movement. And on the southbound side, it is the narrowest portion here is about 15 feet from face to face. Looking for your feedback, we could also look at narrowing this one up. I guess the thought was kind of that it's at a stop sign, it's for a short distance, that we would allow bikes and cars to kind of take turns, but not a real heavy bike volume on Comanche Way. So I think that pretty much covers it for this area. So I can take questions.
Hey, Ken, you're first, and then Grant, and then Chris.
What's your general observations as far as the efficacy of the islands? And that's the first part. And the second is, are these islands, do they have like 2-foot vertical like planters or low bushes, or is it just a pavement? Thanks.
Yeah, good questions. For the efficacy, I would say the results are mixed. We have areas that have islands where we still get complaints of speeding. The reason I think they might be better here is because of the curves in the road. This was brought up as one of the possible solutions or ideas, and the resident who had the initial complaint thought that it was a good step because of the number of vehicles they see as not obeying the existing marked lanes, and the extreme that this could possibly solve the extreme high speeds. Drivers are still going to be able to drive. They're still going to be able to speed around the islands, but they're not going to be able to do the extreme speeding of, over 50 miles an hour, where I think if we can cut down on that, that's at least a step in the right direction. For the plantings or concrete in the middle of the islands, if we can get someone to maintain plantings, we could possibly look into that. I would say the chances of that are probably low because of the history of that. We've had these in different parts of the city where someone agrees to do the to maintain plantings, and then after a few years, people move. They stop maintaining the plantings, and then it gets put onto engineering, and they'll end up having to switch it out to mulch or concrete because of the maintenance. So what we have been doing is planting like a no-mow grass. So it's basically just like a low grass that we don't really requires basically no maintenance. So that's one of the options. I think we would probably go towards that instead of because these are larger islands instead of concrete. When it gets smaller, then it's kind of not worth the effort to put in landscaping, but these are pretty good size islands.
Did that answer your question, Ken, or did you have more?
Well, I like the idea of the islands, and I'm just thinking, having driven this before and seen it, I think the goal here is not necessarily to get 80% people driving under the speed limit. I think it's to get the 5% that are going 30 miles an hour over the speed limit down to only 10 miles an hour I mean, I hate to be that cynical, but I think that's what we have to aim for on this stretch.
Okay, Grant, you're next.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, largely similar comments to the other one. So I would say look to skinny them up to have the appropriate width. Particularly just expecting a 11-foot lane for a bus, and at least a 5-foot for the bike. But especially because of I guess I agree with Ken that this isn't going to really completely solve the speeding problem, and so I think we need to expect that there's going to be still pretty high speeds, and especially when then people are kind of whipping around the islands, they're going to take up even more space. So I think we should not squeeze that too tight. So you having a 4-foot bike lane and a 10-foot travel lane, I think is definitely on the small side. So I would expand those out. And then the other thing, kind of similarly, just think about the pedestrian crossings. So I think especially at Comanche, it looks like the western island might need to slide back a bit to be able to have that. And I think we should put in that crosswalk. So just think about placement and marking any crosswalks that aren't there right now. And then I think looks like, as you said, there's not a lot of ped access or crossings for most of the stretch, but the other one that kind of stood out for me was the far eastern one by kind of closest to North Sherman. There's a sidewalk that comes up from the south there, and I know it probably doesn't even have a curb cut across the street, but at some point in the future there could or should be. So maybe if you can slide that one, back to the east a bit, just to at least have that make sure that we have an opportunity to have a crosswalk there at some point if we want to install one. Thank you.
Yep, I think we can do all that. Thanks.
Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. I assume that at the islands, the bike lane would curve with the lane and continue along the side there. That's the question, I guess.
So, yep, this is kind of a
okay.
Details to be worked out there.
Yeah. So I know you're constrained by the curves and stuff. I'm wondering about the placement of some of these, especially where they line up with some of the larger driveways. And basically you're cutting off people's turning movements. And I imagine there's going to be some folks not happy about that. So I don't know if there are alternatives in some of those places where the island could be moved or split like you're doing at Comanche.
Yeah, I'll make sure all the turning movements are maintained. So so for this one, we might need to shorten it up a little bit to let people in.
Okay.
But yep, we won't restrict any turning movements.
That's it. Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, what I have, Bill, go ahead.
Thank you. Tom, I appreciate hearing about the no mow grass, and I'm kind of interested in seeing if that will work. I'll speak against any thought of landscaping because I have seen that. It doesn't work. First 2 years, maybe 3 years, probably not. After that, it looks ugly. And so, Tom, you're absolutely right. Then engineering has to go back in and fill those in and so forth. And I think I'd like to see what the no mow grass looks like, or as far as if that sounds promising. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Have we used that before, Tom?
Yeah, so all of our projects last year received that. It sounds like the way we're moving. So,
Harold, I put your hand down by mistake, so it's your turn. Go ahead.
Thank you. I didn't even notice. Could you go back to the intersection with Comanche, please? I'm just wondering, what is the purpose of the island on Comanche? Because, as you said, there's the stop signs. And so I guess I'm not totally sure what that one is supposed to achieve. Is that to slow down turning movements?
yeah, basically just to make the turns as tight as possible to slow down the turning movements. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, that seems worthwhile doing.
Okay, thanks, Harold. Denise, you're next.
Since you're doing that intersection at Comanche and Wheeler, are there curb ramps in that intersection already? And if not, can those just be installed so that that's an accessible intersection?
We can review those. I think they're in already, but as Alder Foster said, we don't have a marked crosswalk on the western
right
way. So, but the curb ramps are all existing.
Okay.
So,
yeah, we go into that neighborhood quite a bit to visit friends, and I know once you cross Comanche, then it's a much quieter. So I can see the rationale for only one crosswalk, but if it's nice to have them both, so you don't have to walk to the other side of the street if it's an unnecessary part of the trip. So, thanks.
Yep, we can add that.
Okay, so Grant, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, just wanted to add on my comments about the WIS for the islands. I would include a revisit of that one on Comanche as well. So I do think there should be space to have a bike lane and a car in the future. And so I think if it sounded like with a little bit of a skinning, that could be accommodated. So just wanted to make sure that was on your list of things to revisit.
Okay, yep.
Thanks.
And Ken, go ahead. You're muted.
Do you want a motion now, or do you want to bring this back? Does Tom want to bring this back?
Well, let me tell you what I have. I have narrowed the islands to make sure that we have 11-foot lanes for buses and 5-foot lanes for bikes. No more grasses on the bigger islands. Think about, we should look to mark the crosswalks, especially at Comanche and the eastern intersection. I didn't get the name of that one, Tom. And you'll make sure all the turning movements are maintained. Is there any question about that, or if everybody's did I miss anything that we were talking about? If not, you want to make that motion, Ken?
I would move approval of the design that Tom's given us with his accommodating the different comments that we've made.
Is there a second? Bill?
I'll second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Further discussion? Nazra, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering if we can bring back, I know I raised my hand late, but can we approve after those changes have been made?
Say again?
Can we approve the motion after those changes have been made? And send it back for later approval?
Are you asking us to wait?
Yes.
Okay, and what would be your request for why we would wait, is since we've given them all of the direction?
To see the changes, because the changes when you recommend and then the final piece, it's different. So I'm wondering, if it's possible to approve once those changes have been made.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second on the table, and part of the discussion is a preference that we wait to move forward until we actually see Tom come back with the updated designs, incorporating everything that we've talked about. Other comments from people? Since there is a motion on the floor already, I think we'll need to take action on that motion. Did you have other comments, Nazra, or anybody else have any other comments?
No.
Okay. All right. Grant, go ahead.
I guess just a question to Tom. I mean, I guess I'm probably comfortable approving it with the recommendations, but if, I mean, would it be simple enough to come back at our next meeting with those modifications? And would that still work with the timeline to do it that way?
Yeah, that's not an issue because I'll have to be coming back with Lakeside anyway, so I can just bring that at the same time.
Okay, well, I guess if that's the case, I would move a substitute to ask Tom to come back with the recommended changes at our next meeting.
Okay, there's a motion for that substitute. I have Ken next. You're muted, Ken.
I could either withdraw my motion or second Grant's.
Why don't you go ahead and second his substitute?
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
All right. So we have a motion and a second for the substitute motion. Bill, did you have a comment?
I was going to take away my second.
Okay. All right. So we have a substitute motion on the table to ask Tom to come back, since he's coming back anyway, to return with updated designs incorporating all the various recommendations that we have made. Bill, did you have something else, or did I forget to lower your hand?
I was trying to lower it myself.
Okay, there we go. Okay. All right, I don't see any more hands up. So we have a motion to ask Tom to bring back the designs for Wheeler with incorporating all of the recommendations that we have made. Is there any further discussion? Okay, seeing no hands, I'll assume a unanimous consent vote. If anybody's opposed to that, please raise your hand. Okay, I see no hands. Thank you very much, Tom. A lot of good discussion, and we'll see you back to talk about this one again and the third one that you're coming back to discuss. So thanks. Very, very good discussions on, these are very helpful too for our traffic calming subcommittee, I think, Tom. So, okay. Next, we have an update on said traffic calming subcommittee. We've made the commitment to meet weekly for the next 5 weeks in order to keep our momentum moving forward. We have some pretty good momentum going. We plan to have a preliminary draft of our final report and priority recommendations for discussion at the joint meeting on the 24th of March. We spent the last meeting talking about, we reviewed preliminary draft of the final report and updated draft of the priority recommendations. Had some great discussions about danger. We've had a lot of discussion about what we can't do on streets where there are EMS and bus routes, and we want to think about what's acceptable in terms of injuries and deaths, and what can we do to control and reduce speeding on EMS and bus routes. So what we talked about this evening was very relevant to our conversation that we're planning to have tomorrow with regard to this topic. Island seems like one alternative, and certainly we have others that we can discuss. We also had some great discussion about the need to consider equity. And what do we mean by it being equitable in all elements of the new program? So we've invited someone to come from the Department of Civil Rights to attend our meeting on March 4th and facilitate a discussion on equity in all aspects of the new program. And then we're going to wrap that all into revisiting how we're going to evaluate requests and what ranking criteria are we going to use for both large requests and small requests. So anybody else from the subcommittee have any other updates? Okay. All right. Grant or Chris, do you have an update for us on the TPPB?
Yeah, sure, I can jump in. A couple of things that came up that might be of interest if I can open my notes. I'm having trouble. Okay. There was a presentation at our last meeting about the capital improvement ranking process. So the city is looking at how they prioritize capital improvements with a scoring system. And it's pretty good work, and I think might be of interest to folks. There was a discussion about transit on State Street. The city kind of responded to a report from DMI and some other stuff out there about whether buses belong on State Street in the long run or not. And then we formed a working group on RP3 to dig into how RP3 could change to address the needs of balancing parking, sort of similar to stuff we saw on Sheboygan Ave tonight, I think. So some change coming there, hopefully.
Okay, thank you so much, Chris. Next, announcements. Just a reminder that we have the joint meeting on the 24th. Another reminder that you received an email that there's a Metro Transit Redesign Study public information meeting on March the 3rd from 6 to 7:30. It's a Zoom meeting. So please consider participating in that process. We still have 2 vacancies on the TC. So again, bring forward any suggestions you might have to Patrick, who can get them over to the mayor's office, or to myself, who can get it over to the mayor's office. That's all I had, unless anybody had any other announcements. Okay. Future agenda items. The tentative listing of the agenda items, which is sort of a moving target, for March 10th is in Legistar. We have a very full agenda for March 10th, as you can imagine, with the items that were referred forward this evening to March 10th and everything else that we already had from looking at the Metro Transit service changes, the approval of the bus pads, traffic enforcement move from MPD to parking division, follow up on the neighborhood traffic management program. We have the Lakeside or the Lake Street redevelopment and West Washington coming back. So I've asked if we can push the e-cycle out to April. We will look to see if any of those things can wait, but as far as I know, none of them likely can wait. So with having the joint meeting on the 24th, we don't have a good spot to push those forward. So be prepared for a long meeting on March 10th, I guess is the message. So I added all the notes that we had this evening. Madison Yards coming back, potential public hearing with regard to parking there. Information on ped bike enhancements will come back to us at some point. That's an addition. High injury network at some point will come back to us, as Yang mentioned. Certainly goes to the policy board for approval. Anything else I'm missing? You have a lot going on. Okay, if there's anything else, as always, just go ahead and email us. Let Patrick know and we can get it on the list. All right. If there's nothing else, I need a motion to adjourn. And thanks everybody again for the great input this evening. I am constantly amazed and grateful for the feedback that everybody brings forward at each of our meetings. So thanks to everybody. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Bill? And
Motion to
Chris.
adjourn.
Okay, and a second by Chris, I assume? Okay. We'll assume a unanimous consent vote to adjourn. And thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time.